A little leopard cub keeps following an officer, but what happened next will melt your heart. At first, it looks like nothing more than a lost animal clinging to the only person who shows it kindness. But with every step, the mystery deepens. Because this cub isn't just lost. It's a clue to something much darker. The officer, mocked for being too soft, suddenly finds himself pulled into a fight far bigger than he ever imagined. A fight where danger lurks in the shadows, where powerful forces will stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. As the cub refuses to leave his side, the question grows louder. Was this chance meeting an accident or destiny? And when the truth finally comes out, will protecting the helpless cost him everything he has left? Before we dive in, drop your name or city in the comments. It reminds me that behind every view is a real heartbeat. The mist hung low over the parish backroads, turning the Louisiana morning into a dreamlike haze. Deputy Caleb Stroud drummed, his fingers on the steering wheel of his patrol car, trying to shake off the sting of yesterday's mockery at the station. Too gentle for his own good, they'd said, loud enough for him to hear. He'd pretended not to notice, but the words had followed him home. The radio crackled with routine traffic stops and minor incidents. Caleb kept to his usual route, checking on the elderly residents who lived out past where the pavement turned to gravel. Mrs. Rodriguez would need her medicine delivery today. Mr. Thompson might want help with his mail. Small things, but they mattered to him. A flash of movement caught his eye. Caleb eased the patrol car to a stop, squinting through the fog. There, at the edge of the thick brush, something small and spotted. His heart skipped a beat as a leopard cub emerged, its coat dull and its ribs showing through its skin. The cub's golden eyes locked onto him, filled with a desperate kind of trust that made his throat tight. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, staying in his car. "You shouldn't be here." The cub took a hesitant step forward, then another. Caleb watched, barely breathing, as it approached his vehicle. This wasn't right. Exotic cats didn't just wander the Louisiana backroads. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Stroud. Well, you're not going to believe this." "Go ahead, Stroud," came the bored reply. "I've found what appears to be a leopard cub out on Old Miller Road." The silence lasted 3 seconds before laughter crackled through the speaker. "Oh, what now? You sure it ain't just a big house cat?" "Deputy?" Caleb's face grew warm, but he kept his voice steady. "No, ma'am. Definitely a leopard cub. Requesting animal control." "Whatever you say, Stroud. I'll put in the call. Try not to adopt it in the meantime." More laughter in the background. Caleb set the radio down and stepped out of his car, moving slowly. "You need to go back to wherever you came from," he told the cub firmly. "Go on now." The cub didn't move. Instead, it made a small sound, something between a whimper and a chirp, that seemed to reach right into Caleb's chest and squeeze. He took a few steps away, trying to discourage it. The cub followed, its paws making no sound on the damp asphalt. When he walked back to his car, it stayed right with him, like a shadow he couldn't shake. "You can't do this," he muttered, more to himself than the cub. "I'm already the joke of the department. If they see me with you—" But the cub just looked up at him with those golden eyes, and Caleb felt something shift inside him. This wasn't about what his colleagues thought. This was about doing what was right, even if it made him look foolish. The cub was scared and alone, probably hungry too. Something had brought it here, something that needed investigating. His instincts, the ones his fellow officers laughed at, told him this wasn't random. The radio crackled again. "Animal control's about an hour out, Stroud. Try not to let your new friend eat any locals before they arrive." Caleb watched as the cub settled next to his boot, pressing against his leg like it had found its safe harbor in a storm. "Copy that," he replied quietly, already knowing that this moment was bigger than just a stray animal. This little creature had chosen him, trusted him, when it had every reason to run. Maybe being gentle wasn't such a weakness after all. Caleb knelt beside the leopard cub, his gentle hands hovering uncertainly. "Come on, little one. The swamps, where you belong." The morning mist had begun to lift, revealing the dense tree line that marked the edge of the bayou. The cub just stared back at him. UNMOVING. With a sigh, he straightened up and surveyed the area. Something about this felt wrong. Exotic animals didn't just appear on Louisiana backroads. His eyes caught on something metallic glinting in the undergrowth. Moving carefully, Caleb pushed through the brush. His breath caught as he found a used tranquilizer dart half buried in the mud. Nearby, heavy boot prints cut through the soft earth. Nothing like the usual hunting tracks he was used to seeing. A few feet away, dark spots stained the leaves. "Blood. This is getting serious," he muttered, pulling out his phone to document the evidence. The cub had followed him, pressing against his leg as if seeking protection. Caleb's hand instinctively dropped to its head, feeling the slight tremor in its small body. Back at the station, Caleb stood before Captain Reynolds' desk, photos spread out between them. "Sir, these aren't regular hunters. The tranquilizer darts. The blood patterns. This looks like organized poaching." Captain Reynolds leaned back, his chair creaking. "Stroud, you're making mountains out of molehills again. Probably just some kids messing around with their daddy's hunting gear." From the doorway came a derisive snort. Officer Burke lounged against the frame, arms crossed. "That's our Caleb, turning a stray cat into a federal case. Tell me, you gonna knitted a sweater too?" "The evidence is right here," Caleb insisted, pointing to the photos. "Someone's trafficking exotic animals through our parish." "Evidence?" Burke laughed. "All I see is proof that you're too soft for this job." "Always have been." He turned to the captain. "Sir, we've got real police work waiting." Captain Reynolds gathered the photos and handed them back to Caleb. "Take the animal to the vet, file your report, and get back to your regular patrol." "That's an order." The veterinary clinic sat on the outskirts of town, a modest building with a well-tended flower garden out front. Inside, Mara Delaney looked up from her paperwork, her green eyes widening at the sight of Caleb with the leopard cub in his arms. "Well, this is definitely a first," she said, quickly clearing space on an examination table. "Where did you find it?" As Caleb explained, Mara's hands moved expertly over the cub, checking for injuries. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her movements were both gentle and confident. "There are some cuts here," she murmured, parting the fur carefully, "and signs of dehydration. Whatever happened to this little one, it wasn't good." "The department thinks I'm overreacting," Caleb admitted, watching as she cleaned the wounds. Mara's hands paused. "Because you care? That's not a weakness, Deputy Stroud." She met his eyes. "Someone hurt this cub. Someone brought it here illegally. That matters." The cub stayed remarkably still under her touch, only flinching slightly when she applied antiseptic. Caleb found himself impressed by both her skill and her certainty. "Most people would have just called animal control and walked away," she continued, administering fluids through a small four. "You stayed. You look closer." "That's exactly what a good officer should do." Something warm settled in Caleb's chest. Not just from her words, but from the way she said them, like his compassion was a strength rather than a flaw. He watched as she wrapped the cub's leg with practiced care, her movements sure but tender. "I'll need to keep it here for observation," Mara said, scratching behind the cub's ears. "But I'd appreciate updates on your investigation." She paused, then added more softly, "Someone needs to stand up for the ones who can't protect themselves." Their eyes met again, and Caleb saw in her the same determination he felt, a shared understanding that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the easy thing. He nodded, knowing he'd found an ally in this quiet veterinary nurse, even if neither of them said it aloud. Caleb sat in his patrol car, reviewing his notes from the past week. The Leopard Cub's appearance had led him down an unexpected path, and pieces were starting to form a troubling picture. He'd interviewed dock workers, followed paper trails, and gathered whispers that all seemed to point in one direction: Silas Renard's shipping empire. On paper, Renard was a pillar of the community. His company employed hundreds of locals, and his charitable foundation had built a new wing of the children's hospital. But something didn't add up. Caleb spread out his hastily drawn timeline on the passenger seat. 3 times in the past month, exotic animal sightings had coincided with nighttime deliveries at Renard's private dock. The workers there clammed up whenever Caleb asked questions, their eyes darting nervously before making excuses to leave. "Just connecting dots," Caleb muttered, adding another note to his growing file. His phone buzzed, a text from Mara at the clinic. "Cub doing better. Found something interesting in blood work. Can you stop by?" Before he could respond, a sharp knock on his window made him jump. Captain Reynolds stood there, face tight with anger. Caleb quickly rolled down the window. "Sir, my office, now." The captain's voice left no room for argument. Inside the station, Reynolds closed his office door with deliberate care. "Sit down, Stroud." Caleb settled into the hard wooden chair, noting the unusual tension in his superior's shoulders. "I've received a call," Reynolds began, pacing behind his desk. "From Mr. Renard's office. Seems you've been asking questions about his shipping operations. Unauthorized questions." "Sir, I have reason to believe." "Stop." Reynolds slammed his palm on the desk. "Listen carefully, because I'm only saying this once. Silas Renard employs half this town. His taxes fund our department. His foundation built the hospital where your mother got her cancer treatment." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. That doesn't put him above the law. "The law?" Reynolds laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've got some tranquilizer darts and a stray cat. Meanwhile, Renard has friends in the governor's mansion. This stops now. That's not a request. What about the evidence?" "What evidence?" Reynolds pulled out Caleb's case file from his desk. "This? Consider it closed." He dropped it into his shredder, maintaining eye contact as the machine whirred to life. Caleb stood, his hands shaking slightly. "You can shred the paper, sir, but that doesn't change what's happening. Get out of my office, Stroud. And remember, some things are bigger than your bleeding heart." Outside, Caleb leaned against his patrol car, trying to steady his breathing. A sleek black SUV rolled past, moving too slowly to be casual. The tinted windows revealed nothing, but he felt eyes on him. When he pulled out of the parking lot 10 minutes later, the same vehicle appeared in his rearview mirror dot at the veterinary clinic. Mara was waiting with concern etched on her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Close enough." Caleb followed her to the examination room where the cub was recovering. The small leopard perked up at his arrival, letting out a quiet chirp. "What did you find?" "Traces of a specialized sedative in his blood work." Mara handed him a report. "It's not something regular hunters use. This is professional grade, requiring special permits. The only local facility licensed to handle it is Renard Shipping," Caleb finished, "for their live animal imports. Legal ones, anyway." Mara stroked the cub's head. "They're watching you, aren't they?" Caleb moved to the window. The black SUV was parked across the street, engine idling. "Yeah, seems I've rattled some expensive cages." "What will you do?" Looking down at the cub, now dozing peacefully under Mara's gentle touch, Caleb felt something solidify in his chest. This wasn't just about one rescued animal anymore. It was about choosing between comfortable silence and difficult truth. "The right thing," he said quietly, whatever that costs. The evening sun cast long shadows through the veterinary clinic's windows as Caleb watched Mara bottle feed the leopard cub. Over the past few days, they'd fallen into a comfortable routine of shared care and quiet conversations. The cub had grown stronger, its golden eyes brighter, and its trust in them absolute. "You're getting good at this," Mara said, smiling as Caleb gently took over feeding duties. For someone who tried to shoo him away at first. "Yeah, well, he's pretty hard." To resist, Caleb adjusted his hold as the cub pawed playfully at the bottle. "Kind of like someone else I know." Mara's cheeks flushed slightly as she busied herself with organizing medical supplies. "Careful, deputy. People might start thinking you're not as serious as that badge suggests." Their comfortable moment was interrupted by the distinct sound of an engine idling outside. Caleb moved to the window, careful not to disturb the feeding cub. The same black SUV from earlier sat across the street, its tinted windows revealing nothing but reflecting everything. "Third time today," he muttered. "They're not even trying to be subtle anymore." Mara joined him at the window, her shoulder brushing against his. "Should we call it in? To who?" "The department's made it clear where they stand." He sighed, watching the SUV finally pull away. "I'd better head home. Early patrol tomorrow." The drive home felt longer than usual as Caleb checked his rearview mirror every few blocks. When he finally pulled into his driveway, something felt off. The porch light he always left on was dark. As he approached his front door, his hand instinctively moved to his service weapon. The lock was intact, but when he pushed the door open, his living room told a different story. Someone had been there. Not vandals. They'd been too careful, too precise. His personal belongings were untouched, but his home office was another matter. The drawer where he kept his case files hung open, empty except for his official police reports. All his notes about the cub, the shipping manifests he'd copied, the photographs of the tranquilizer darts, gone. Caleb's phone rang, making him jump. It was Mara, her voice tight with panic. "The cub's gone," she said without preamble. "I went to check on him after my last appointment, and his kennel was empty." "The lock wasn't broken. They had a key, Caleb. They had access to the clinic." His stomach dropped. "I'm on my way." The clinic's security cameras revealed what they'd feared. 2 men in maintenance uniforms had walked in through the front door, used a key to access the treatment area, and left with the cub in a covered carrier. No one had questioned them. They'd moved with the confidence of belonging there. "Look," Mara pointed to a frame showing one man's sleeve riding up. "That tattoo. I've seen it before on one of Reynard's dock supervisors." Caleb studied the footage again, his jaw clenched. "They're sending a message. They know everything. Where I keep my files, how to access the clinic, probably where I get my morning coffee. What do we do?" Mara's voice wavered slightly, but her eyes were determined. "They think this will scare us off." Caleb turned to face her. "But they just proved everything we suspected. This isn't some small-time operation. They've got resources, connections, people everywhere, and they just showed their hand." Mara reached for his arm, her fingers warm against his sleeve. "We're not backing down, are we?" "No," Caleb said, firmly. "But from now on, we have to be smarter than them. They're watching every official move I make, which means we need to start working unofficially." The security footage played on loop behind them, a silent reminder that they were up against something bigger than they'd imagined. But as Caleb looked at Mara, saw the same determination in her eyes that he felt in his heart, he knew they had something Renard's organization didn't. A cause worth fighting for, and nothing left to lose. The swamp's darkness pressed in around Caleb as he crept through the murky water. His flashlight beam cut through the thick night air, catching cypress knees and Spanish moss in its path. Every step had to be carefully placed, One wrong move could send him stumbling into deeper water or alert whatever waited in the shadows. Anonymous tips had led him here, to this remote stretch of bayou where suspicious activity had been reported. The water reached his knees, soaking his uniform pants as he pushed forward. Somewhere in this maze of water and trees, he hoped to find evidence of Reynard's operation, and maybe even the cub. A twig snapped behind him. Caleb spun around, his hand reaching for his weapon, but it was too late. A solid mass slammed into him from behind, driving him face first into the swamp water. He struggled to right himself, but strong hands gripped his shoulders, forcing him deeper. "Should have stayed out of it, deputy," a gruff voice snarled. Caleb thrashed against his attackers. He could feel at least 3 sets of hands on him now. A fist connected with his ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Another blow caught his jaw. The murky water turned metallic with the taste of blood. They dragged him up just long enough to gasp for air before shoving him back under. The swamp. Water burned his eyes and filled his nose. His lungs screamed for oxygen. Through the muddy water, he could make out dark shapes moving above him, his attackers keeping him pinned. This was it, he realized with stark clarity. They weren't just trying to scare him anymore. They meant to kill him, right here in the swamp where his body might never be found. Just as his vision started to dim, a piercing yowl cut through the night. The hands holding him loosened slightly, just enough. Caleb wrenched one arm free and struck out blindly, connecting with something solid. Shouts of surprise and pain erupted above him. "What the hell is that? Get it off! Get it off!" Through his water-blurred vision, Caleb saw a small spotted form launching itself at one of his attackers. The Leopard Cub, somehow free and finding him here, was creating chaos. Its claws might have been small, but its fury was mighty. Caleb seized his chance. He drove his elbow back hard, catching one man in the knee. As the grip on him weakened, he surged upward, gasping in blessed air. His fist found the jaw, his knee another attacker's stomach. The element of surprise was his only advantage. He had to make it count. The cub's distraction proved vital. With the attackers divided between defending against both Caleb and the surprisingly fierce cub, their coordinated assault fell apart. Caleb stumbled backward, his feet finding purchase on firmer ground. Blood streamed from his split lip and a cut above his eye, but adrenaline kept him moving. "Let's go!" one of the attackers shouted. This wasn't supposed to get complicated. Caleb watched them retreat into the darkness, their splashing footsteps fading quickly. Only when he was sure they were gone did he allow himself to sink to his knees, his whole body trembling from exertion and a near-death experience. The Leopard Cub appeared at his side, pressing against his leg with a soft chirp. Its fur was wet, but its golden eyes gleamed with fierce loyalty in the moonlight. "You saved my life, little one," Caleb whispered hoarsely, running a shaking hand over the cub's spotted coat. "But how did you even find me?" The answer didn't matter. What mattered was that he now understood the full scope of what he was dealing with. Renard's operation wasn't just about smuggling exotic animals. It was a ruthless enterprise willing to kill to protect its secrets. The time for careful investigation was overdone as Caleb struggled to his feet, every muscle protesting. He knew he could no longer play this safe. Direct confrontation was his only option now. He had evidence of attempted murder to add to his case, and a renewed determination to see Renard's empire fall. The cubs stayed close as they made their way out of the swamp. Both protector and protected, their bond forged stronger in the crucible of violence they'd survived together. Caleb sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by scattered papers and photographs. His body still ached from the swamp attack 3 nights ago, but his mind was sharp, fueled by determination and countless cups of coffee. The Leopard Cub dozed nearby on an old blanket, its spotted chest rising and falling peacefully. Something about the timing of the cub's appearance had been nagging at him. He spread out shipping manifests he'd managed to obtain from Reynard's docks, cross-referencing them with international flight schedules. His eyes kept returning to one particular date, a private charter flight to Malaysia scheduled for next week. It can't be a coincidence, he muttered, reaching for another document. His phone buzzed. It was Mara. "Caleb, you need to see this," she said without preamble. "I was going through those medical records you asked about, and I found something interesting. The blood work we did on the cub? It matches almost exactly with another case from 6 months ago. Another leopard cub. Same age range, similar genetic markers." Caleb sat up straighter. "You're saying there were 2 of them?" "Siblings, most likely. Part of the same litter. And get this. The previous cub was treated at a private facility owned by one of Reynard's shell companies." The pieces started clicking into place. Caleb's gaze swept over the diplomatic cables he'd obtained through a contact correspondence about strengthening trade relations with Malaysia. One line jumped out at him. "Anticipating your generous gift as a symbol of our continued partnership. Mara," he said, his voice tight with realization. "Can you come over?" "I think I've figured it out." 20 minutes later, Mara stood in his kitchen, her auburn hair still damp from the light rain outside. She listened intently as Caleb laid out his theory. "These cubs weren't just random smuggling targets," he explained, pointing to the documents. "They were specifically bred and selected. Reynard was planning to present them as a matched pair, a diplomatic gift to seal some kind of deal with his Malaysian partners." Mara's green eyes widened. "That's why they've been so aggressive about getting this one back. It's not just about covering up local trafficking. It's about international relations," Caleb finished. "Without both cubs, the gift is worthless. And whatever deal Reynard's trying to close falls apart." The cub stirred on its blanket, stretching lazily. Mara knelt beside it, her hand gentle on its spotted fur. "No wonder you found those tranquilizer darts. They needed alive and unharmed." "This is bigger than we thought," Caleb said, running a hand through his sandy hair. "It's not just exotic pets for rich collectors. Reynard's building an international network, using these animals as currency to buy influence." Mara stood up, moving closer to him. Her voice was soft but intense. "Caleb, these people already tried to kill you once. If you're right about this." She placed her hand on his arm, and he could feel the slight tremor in her touch. "I know," he said quietly, covering her hand with his own. The contact sent a warm current through him, different from the adrenaline of danger. "But I can't back down now." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Mara's concern for him was written plainly on her face, but there was something else there too, something deeper that made his heart beat faster. "Then let me help," she said firmly. "You don't have to do this alone." Caleb nodded slowly. "Actually, there is someone else who might be able to help. But convincing him won't be easy." The next morning found Caleb driving down a remote dirt road, the cub secured safely at Mara's clinic. He pulled up to a weathered cabin where a man sat on the porch cleaning a rifle. Marcus Wheeler had been a wildlife officer for 20 years. Before his sudden retirement 3 years ago. "Figured someone would show up eventually," Wheeler said without looking up. His gray beard was unkempt, his eyes hard beneath his battered hat. "Heard you've been poking around Reynard's business." "You tried to stop him before," Caleb said, mounting the porch steps. 3 years ago, right before you quit." Wheeler's hands stilled on the rifle. Didn't quit. Was strongly encouraged to retire. After my evidence disappeared and witnesses changed their stories. He finally looked up at Caleb. "You got proof?" "Letter. I've got one of the cubs he was planning to use as a diplomatic gift. And I know about the Malaysian connection." That got Wheeler's attention. He set the rifle aside. "Inside," he said gruffly. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, Caleb laid out his evidence and theory. Wheeler listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each detail. When Caleb finished, the older man stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. "Been keeping my own records," Wheeler said, pulling out a thick folder. "Names, dates, shipping routes. Everything I could salvage before they shut me down. Wasn't enough for a case then, but combined with what you've got now, we can prove the international connection," Caleb said. "Show that it's not just local corruption. It's an organized trafficking operation with diplomatic implications." Wheeler studied him for a long moment. "You know what you're up against?" "Renard's got judges in his pocket, politicians on his payroll. Man like that, he doesn't just break laws, he rewrites them. That's why we need to hit him where it hurts," Caleb replied. "Expose the Malaysian deal before it happens. Once international attention is on him, local protection won't matter." A hint of the old fire sparked in Wheeler's eyes. "Might work, but we'll need more than papers and theories. Need to catch them in the act. The charter flight leaves in 6 days, Caleb said. "They'll have to move the other Cub before then." Wheeler nodded slowly. "All right, Deputy. Let's talk strategy." But first, he reached under his desk and pulled out a bottle of bourbon. "You better understand exactly what we're getting into." As they began planning their counterstrike, Caleb felt a mix of hope and apprehension. With Wheeler's experience and his own evidence, they had a chance. But Renard's operation was vast, and they would only get one shot at bringing it down. The Leopard Cub's fate, and perhaps his own, would depend on getting everything exactly right. The night air hung thick with anticipation as Caleb crouched behind a stack of shipping containers at Renard's docks. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his hands remained steady. Wheeler knelt beside him, binoculars trained on the approaching truck's headlights. 3 other trusted deputies, the only ones Caleb knew weren't in Renard's pocket, waited at strategic points around the perimeter. "Remember," Wheeler whispered, "we need solid evidence. Photos, documentation, and witnesses. Don't move until we're sure." Caleb nodded, thinking of the Leopard Cub safely hidden at Mara's clinic. She had insisted on being here tonight, positioned in her car 2 blocks away with a camera and direct line to federal wildlife authorities. The thought of her nearby both comforted and worried him. The truck's engine cut off. 2 men emerged from the cab, followed by 3 more from a black SUV. That pulled up moments later. They approached the rear of the truck, speaking in low voices. "Wait for it," Wheeler breathed. The men unlocked the truck's rear doors. As they swung open, weak cries and rustling sounds drifted across the night air. Caleb's jaw clenched as he spotted stacked cages through his night vision scope. Wheeler touched his arm. "Now," Caleb keyed his radio. "All units, move in." Everything happened at once. Floodlights blazed to life as Caleb's team emerged from their positions. The smugglers froze, then scattered. 2 made it 3 steps before Wheeler's deputies tackled them. Another reached for a weapon but found Caleb's gun already trained on him. "Hands where I can see them," Caleb ordered, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had always been there, even when others dismissed it. Wheeler moved quickly, securing the suspects while Caleb approached the truck. Inside, his stomach turned. Dozens of cages held exotic animals, rare birds, small primates, and in the furthest corner, a leopard cub that could have been a twin to the one they'd rescued. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Mara approaching, camera in hand. She gasped at the sight of the animals. "Document everything," Caleb told her. "Every cage, every animal. We need it all on record." She nodded, already snapping photos. "I'll call my father's clinic. We'll need proper transport and medical care for all of them." For the next hour, they worked methodically. More officers arrived, ones Wheeler trusted, along with wildlife officials and veterinary staff. Each animal was documented, each cage cataloged. The smugglers were read their rights and transported to holding cells. As dawn approached, Caleb found himself standing beside Mara, watching the last of the rescue vehicles pull away. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a tentative sense of victory. "We did it," Mara said softly, her green eyes bright with triumph despite her exhaustion. "They can't ignore this evidence." Caleb turned to face her. In the growing light, her auburn hair caught the sun like copper wire. Words he'd been holding back pressed against his lips. "Mara, A sharp crack split the air. Caleb instinctively pulled Mara down as a bullet whizzed past. More shots followed as black-clad figures emerged from the shadows. "Move!" Caleb shouted, pushing her toward cover behind a container. But they were surrounded. 3 men grabbed Mara while 2 more engaged Caleb. He fought desperately, but a blow to the back of his head sent him stumbling. Through blurring vision, he saw Mara struggling against her captors. "Caleb!" She screamed as they dragged her toward a waiting vehicle. He tried to rise, but another hit drove him to his knees. By the time Wheeler reached him, the vehicle was gone, taking Mara with it. "No," Caleb gasped, blood trickling down his neck. No. Wheeler helped him up, face grim. This was Renard. He's sending a message. Caleb's world narrowed to a single point of devastating clarity. They had struck a blow against Renard's empire, but the cost, the woman who had stood by him, who had believed in him when no one else did, who had become so much more than just an ally. His phone buzzed. The message contained only an address and 2 words. "Choose carefully." Wheeler gripped his shoulder. "We'll get her back, son, but we need to be smart about this." Caleb stared at the phone, his hands shaking with rage and fear. The gentle deputy everyone had dismissed was gone. In his place stood a man who would tear Renard's world apart to save the woman he loved. But first, he had to figure out how to keep Mara alive long enough to reach her. Caleb's hands trembled as he pressed an ice pack against the back of his head. The sheriff's station buzzed with quiet activity around him, but he barely registered it. All he could see was Mara being dragged away, her terrified scream echoing in his mind. Wheeler paced in front of the evidence board they'd hastily assembled. Photos of Renard's properties, shipping manifests, and surveillance shots covered nearly every inch. At the center was a satellite image of Renard's sprawling estate, a fortress disguised as a mansion. "We have to assume they're keeping her." "There," Wheeler said, tapping the image. "It's the most secure location he has, and he'll want her close." Caleb nodded, wincing at the movement. "What about backup?" "I've got 6 deputies I trust completely." Wheeler's weathered face was grim. "The rest, we can't risk it. Renard's got too many people in his pocket." The wildlife officer they'd worked with, James Martinez, leaned against a desk nearby. "I can bring in 4 more from my department. All good people who've been trying to nail Renard for years. 11 against his private army." Caleb stood slowly, fighting off a wave of dizziness. "It'll have to be enough." Dr. Samuel Delaney, Mara's father, burst through the door. His normally neat appearance was disheveled, his face ashen. "Any word?" Caleb's chest tightened. "Not yet, Sam, but we're gonna get her back." The older man gripped Caleb's arm. "She believed in you, you know? Even before all this. Said you were different from the others, that you had a real heart under that badge." The words hit Caleb like physical blows. He thought of all the quiet moments with Mara at the clinic, the way she'd look at him when she thought he wasn't watching. How had he not seen it sooner? His phone buzzed again. Another message from Renard. "Time is running out. Bring me the evidence, or she suffers for your stubbornness." Caleb's fingers tightened around the phone until his knuckles went white. "We need a plan," something they won't expect. Martinez spread out detailed blueprints of Renard's estate that he'd obtained through his contacts. The main security is focused on the ground level and perimeter, but there's a weakness here. He pointed to a section of the roof. The solar panel installation created a blind spot in their camera coverage. That's still a 3-story climb. Wheeler pointed out, I can help with that. Everyone turned to see Katie Chun, a local climbing instructor, standing in the doorway. She was lean and tough, with calloused hands and determined eyes. Mara volunteers at my youth program. Whatever you need, I'm in. Caleb felt a surge of gratitude. People were stepping up, putting themselves on the line for Mara. It wasn't just his fight anymore. They spent the next 2 hours planning, analyzing every angle. Dr. Delaney provided crucial information about the estate's layout. He'd been there for charity functions, though he'd never suspected what lay beneath Renard's philanthropic facade. The wine cellar, he said, pointing to the blueprint. It connects to a series of underground storage rooms. That's got to be where they're keeping the animals before shipping them out. Wheeler nodded. And probably where they're holding Mara. It's the most secure area. Caleb studied the plans, committing every detail to memory. We'll need a distraction. Something big enough to draw their security to the front gates. Martinez grinned. Leave that to me. I've got a few ideas that'll keep them busy. As they finalized the details, Caleb stepped away for a moment. In the bathroom, he splashed cold water on his face and stared at his reflection. The man looking back at him wasn't the same one who'd found a lost leopard cub just days ago. That gentle deputy was still there, but now there was steel in his eyes. He thought of Mara, her compassion, her quiet strength, the way she'd stood beside him when everyone else doubted. Love and duty had become inseparable. He would save her, and in doing so, bring down the empire that had caused so much suffering. Back in the main room, Katie was demonstrating climbing techniques to the team. The grappling equipment is rated for twice your weight, she explained. Just remember, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Dr. Delaney approached Caleb again, pressing something into his hand. It was a small photo of Mara as a child, grinning, while holding a rescued puppy. She's always been a fighter for what's right, he said softly. Just like you. Caleb carefully tucked the photo into his vest pocket, right over his heart. The gesture wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Wheeler gathered everyone around the table. We move at midnight. Martinez's team will create the distraction at 11:45 sharp. Caleb's team will have exactly 20 minutes to scale the east wall before the patrol changes. Once inside, he looked at each person in turn. We're not just saving Mara. We're ending Renard's reign. Make every second count. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. They gathered equipment, checked weapons, and rehearsed their roles. Katie drilled them on climbing techniques until their arms ached. Martinez coordinated with his wildlife officers, setting up the elaborate distraction that would divide Renard's forces. As sunset approached, Caleb found himself alone in the evidence room. He picked up the Leopard Cub's collar, the first piece of evidence that had started it all. Everything had changed since that misty morning when a frightened cub had chosen to trust him. Wheeler found him there. You should rest while you can. I can't. Caleb's voice was rough. Every time I close my eyes, I see them taking her. The older man squeezed his shoulder. I've watched you these past few years, son. Seen how the others treated you, how you never let it change who you are. That strength, that's what Mara saw in you. That's what's going to get her back. Caleb nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. As night fell, the team gathered. One last time. They checked their gear, synchronized their watches, and shared quiet words of encouragement. Dr. Delaney hugged each of them, his eyes bright with tears of gratitude and worry. Caleb led them in a final review of the plan. His voice was steady, his instructions clear. The others listened intently, trusting in the quiet authority they'd once dismissed. "Remember," he concluded, "we're not just fighting for Mara. We're fighting for every animal Renard has trafficked, every life he's destroyed with his greed. Tonight, it ends." They moved out in small groups, taking different routes to avoid. Attention. Caleb rode with Wheeler and Katie, the climbing gear secured in the trunk. The night was clear and cool, the stars sharp overhead dot as they approached the staging area. Caleb touched the photo in his vest pocket. Soon, he would face Renard's fortress and all its dangers. But he wasn't the same man who'd started this journey. Love had given him a strength he never knew he possessed, and duty had forged it into unshakable resolve. They parked in a secluded spot half a mile from the estate. Katie began distributing the climbing gear, checking each harness with meticulous care. Wheeler's radio crackled with updates from Martinez's team, all in position. Caleb looked at his watch. 11:30. In 15 minutes, the night would erupt into carefully orchestrated chaos. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what was to come. "Ready?" Wheeler asked softly. Caleb nodded, his eyes fixed on the distant lights of Renard's mansion. "For Mara." The words carried all his fear, all his determination, all his love. In less than an hour, he would either save everything that mattered or lose it all trying. There was no middle ground, no room for hesitation. The countdown began. The night shattered with the first explosion. Right on schedule, Martinez's team had triggered their diversion at the west gate. Flames painted the sky orange as guard dogs barked and men shouted. Through his binoculars, Caleb watched Renard's security forces sprint toward the commotion, exactly as planned. "Now," Wheeler whispered into his radio. "Team 2, move." Caleb led his small group through the shadows toward the east wall. Katie took point with the climbing gear, her movements swift and silent. The wall loomed 40 feet high, its stone face cold and forbidding in the darkness. Behind it lay Renard's mansion and Mara. They worked quickly, securing the grappling hooks and testing the lines. Caleb's heart hammered as he clipped into his harness. The sound of gunfire echoed from the west side, Martinez keeping Renard's men occupied. "Remember," Katie breathed, "slow and steady. Don't rush." One by one, they began their ascent. Caleb's muscles burned as he pulled himself up the rope, every movement measured and deliberate. Sweat trickled down his back despite the cool night air. Above him, Katie had already reached the top and was scanning for guards. They cleared the wall without detection, dropping into the manicured gardens below. Ornate fountains gurgled nearby, masking their footsteps as they crept toward the mansion. Through the windows, Caleb could see figures moving urgently, responding to the chaos at the gates. The first real resistance came at the service entrance. 2 guards, both armed, blocked their path. Before Caleb could move, Katie had already struck. Her martial arts training made the takedown look effortless. Both men were unconscious before they could raise an alarm. Inside, the mansion was a maze of opulent corridors. Caleb's team split up according to plan. Wheeler and 2 others headed for Renard's office to secure evidence, while Katie led the way to the basement where their intel suggested Mara was being held. They encountered more guards in the main hall. This time, there was no avoiding violence. The fight was brutal but brief. Caleb took a hard punch to the ribs but managed to subdue his opponent. Katie disabled another guard with a precise strike to the throat. The third tried to radio for help, but Tom, their tech expert, had already jammed the frequencies dot as they descended into the basement. The air grew thick with the smell of animals. Dozens of cages lined the walls, holding creatures that should never have been in captivity. Rare birds, exotic reptiles, even big cats. The sight made Caleb's blood boil. Here was the heart of Renard's trafficking operation. They found Mara in a cell at the far end. She was bruised but alert, her eyes blazing with defiance. When she saw Caleb, her face crumpled with relief.
"I
knew you'd come," she whispered as Katie picked the lock. The reunion was cut short by slow applause echoing through the basement. Silas Renard stepped out of the shadows, flanked by his most dangerous men. His silver hair gleamed in the dim light, his expression both amused and cruel. "Officer Stroud," he drawled, "I must admit, I underestimated you. A mistake I won't repeat." Caleb pushed Mara behind him, acutely aware they were outnumbered. Katie shifted into a fighting stance, but Renard's men already had their weapons drawn. "Your little distraction at the gate was clever," Renard continued. "But did you really think I wouldn't have contingency plans?" He moved to a large covered cage in the corner. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long. Time to end this." With a flourish, he pulled away the cover. Inside was a full-grown black leopard, its muscles rippling with barely contained fury. Renard's smile turned vicious as he reached for the cage door. "Let's see how the gentle deputy handles a real predator." The leopard exploded from the cage, a mass of sleek fur and lethal intent. Caleb shoved Mara toward Katie. "Run!" he yelled, drawing the beast's attention to himself. The big cat's eyes locked onto him, pupils dilated in the dim light. What followed was pure instinct and desperate survival. Caleb dove behind a stack of empty cages as the leopard lunged. Its claws screeched against metal where his head had been moments before. He rolled, keeping obstacles between himself and the predator, mind racing for a solution. Renard watched from the stairs, clearly enjoying the spectacle. His men kept their guns trained on Katie and Mara, preventing any interference. The leopard stalked Caleb with lethal grace, testing his defenses, looking for an opening. Then Caleb saw it, his one chance. The basement's support columns created a narrow corridor leading straight to where Renard stood. If he could time it right, he waited until the leopard tensed for another attack, then sprinted toward Renard. The big cat pursued with explosive speed. Renard's smug expression faltered as he realized Caleb's intention, but it was too late. The deputy ducked at the last possible second, and the leopard's momentum carried it straight into its former. "Master!" Chaos erupted. Renard screamed as powerful jaws closed on his arm. His men turned to help him, giving Katie the opening she needed. She launched into action, disarming the nearest guard with brutal efficiency. Mara grabbed the fallen weapon, keeping others at bay. Wheeler's team burst in from above, having secured the upper floors. They quickly subdued the remaining guards while Renard writhed on the floor, the leopard's attack having shattered his arm. And his arrogance. "The authorities are on their way," Wheeler announced. "The evidence in his office is enough to put him away for decades." Caleb approached the leopard cautiously. The big cat turned to face him, blood on its muzzle, but something in its eyes had changed. Perhaps it recognized him as different from the men who had caged it. After a tense moment, it padded away, disappearing into the shadows of the basement. Finally, Caleb turned to Mara. She was already moving toward him, and they collided in an embrace that spoke volumes. Her fingers dug into his back as she buried her face in his chest. He held her just as tightly, his heart pounding with relief and something deeper. "You're bleeding," she murmured, touching a cut on his forehead. "I'm okay," he assured her. "We're both okay now. Okay now." Around them, Wheeler's team was securing the scene. Renard lay moaning, his empire crumbling as red and blue lights began to flash through the basement windows. Justice had come at last, delivered not by force of law alone, but by the very creatures he had sought to exploit. Katie approached them, sporting a split lip but smiling. The wildlife authorities are here. They'll make sure all these animals find proper sanctuaries. Caleb nodded, still holding Mara close. The night's violence was over, replaced by the quiet certainty that things would be different now. Not just for the trafficked animals, but for him and Mara, for the department that had underestimated him, for everyone who had doubted that gentleness could contain its own kind of strength. In the days that followed, news of Renard's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Federal agents swarmed his properties, uncovering evidence of a trafficking network that stretched across continents. The diplomatic scandal erupted when authorities revealed the intended destination of the exotic animals, a foreign dignitary's private collection. At the sheriff's department, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Deputies who once mocked Caleb now sought his insight on cases. His commanding officer, looking properly chastened, formally commended him during a ceremony where Caleb received a commendation for valor. Sometimes the quietest voice speaks the loudest truth, the sheriff admitted, pinning the badge to Caleb's uniform. But Caleb found his greatest satisfaction away from the spotlight. He and Mara spent a peaceful afternoon at the wildlife sanctuary, where the Leopard Cub had found its new home. Through the protective glass, they watched the small spotted figure playing with other rescued cubs, its golden eyes bright with newfound joy. "Look how happy he is," Mara said, leaning into Caleb's side. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining naturally. "He taught me something important," Caleb replied softly. "That being gentle doesn't mean being weak." Mara turned to face him, her green eyes full of warmth. "I knew that about you from the start." The sanctuary's director approached them with papers documenting the cub's progress. "He's thriving here," she reported. "Your intervention saved not just this little one, but exposed a network that was threatening endangered species across 3 continents." Caleb nodded, but his attention was on Mara's hand in his, the quiet strength of their connection. His victory wasn't measured in the headlines about Renard's fall, or in the respect he'd finally earned at work. It lived in moments like this, standing beside the woman who had believed in him, knowing they had protected those who couldn't protect themselves. "Ready to go home?" he asked Mara. "With you?" "Always," she answered, and her smile held all the promise of their future together. As they left the sanctuary, Caleb glanced back one last time at the cub. The small leopard had paused in its play to watch them go, as if offering a final farewell to the man who had changed both their lives through an unwavering devotion to what was right. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect us, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.